Welcome back to G220 Radio. This is Ricky Gantz with Mike Miller, and we want to welcome you to the program. This is the first time we have been back in 2023. We've been off for, I believe it's been maybe a month and a half, taking some downtime, some much needed time. And so Mike's kind of smiling over here because it's not really downtime, I guess, but we have been taking time away from G220 Radio here. And we are back now. And so we're excited to be back, and we're excited to be with you. And we hope you are just as excited to see us as we are to be back here on the program. And so with that being said, Mike, tell us how you've been, what's been going on with you in this time you've been away.
I'm just kidding. You're going to say I was muted, but I wasn't.
No, I saw it go off. I saw the mute button go off, and I was like, okay, he's playing a trick. That's funny.
That's right. Yeah. No. So, yeah, it's been an adventure. We went on vacation for a couple weeks, had some good time with my wife's family in Florida, went home to a just flooded house. We had a water filter break, and so we've been dealing with that now for a month, trying to get insurance, do insurance stuff, getting people out there. And so, yeah, it's just kind of been going through kind of not only dealing with work, but yeah, kind of just dealing with insurances and trying to figure out how this all works. It's the first time I've had to file a claim for home insurance. Mm-hmm. But I got a new kitchen out of the deal, so I guess it's worth all the money I'm paying for them to insure my house. But so yeah, it's been busy and that, and just dealing with all those kind of just extra things that you don't plan, and tends to suck up some of your time.
Yeah. And as we was talking before the program, we both believe in the sovereignty of God and know that when things happen, it doesn't take God by surprise. And then we look and are trying to maybe understand, okay, what is God showing me in this? Maybe he's teaching me patience. Maybe he's teaching me to trust in him, whatever it may be. And so what are some of the things, maybe I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but maybe some of the things you and your wife have talked about, how God has brought you through this so far and is working towards getting all of this fixed?
Yeah, I mean, obviously having my insurance company that we use USAA, and they've been phenomenal. And just dealing with them, like there's a lot of stuff that they just kind of help with and did, and just that way there's not much I have to do. Every once in a while I'll send paperwork or something like that. They've taken care of quite a bit. And then also the company we're using, we were supposed to use one of the bigger names, restoration companies, and now we're using someone that's more local. They're part of like a larger, I think they're like an independently owned franchise, kind of think of that way. And he's a Christian. And so get to use in one way, get to use a Christian business to help them get to kind of meet. He goes to a church actually kind of near to our home church. They're not very far away. So yeah, just that. And there's just been some other things where God has kind of placed us. And part of it is questions that we may have about the future. And God has kind of put us in a position to really evaluate whether those are feasible options about it, and to really kind of think about kind of taking us out of our normacy to kind of force us to maybe think more about some of these things we've thought about but not really fully committed our times and efforts to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that holding to our understanding of Reformed theology and knowing theologically, knowing God's in control of everything, there still is a reality that happens within our natural, normal lives that when something goes down, like you said, it then forces you to consider things or think about things or things you may have been considering and thinking about, but now you have to put them on the forefront and have a conversation about them and think them through. And we ultimately we don't see the big picture, but we yet know and trust that God is working all things together for the good of those who love him, that are called according to his purposes. And even sometimes when that's hard on us, and so we've been praying for you and your family, and hope that the Lord will continue to get this process going along for you guys, that you'll be able to get back in, and whatever decisions you make from that point on, some of the decisions you may have to consider, the Lord will give you wisdom in that as well. It has been a very strange month and a half off. Like you said, you were away, but there was still things that needed to be done, and it was still the same on my end with things that need to be done, and sickness. Like the last couple of years have been rough on me physically. And just this year, starting off the new year, and I'm like, man, I'm already getting under the weather. And I was under the weather for like 2 weeks straight. And it's been kind of rough, but thankfully we've had the downtime, so we didn't have to then try to put together a show and get all of this situated. But we are glad and thankful to be back. We are looking forward to this new year, to some shows that we have planned, some things that we will plan further out into the year, as we continue to go through the year. So we wanted to take this time here tonight. We didn't really put together a big topic kind of show. We're just saying, hey, welcome back to G220 Radio. We are back in the new year. We're excited to be back. I know I've said that because we are excited to be back. My wife was excited to be back. I kept saying, well, maybe we could put it off another week. And she's like, oh, you got to get back on the radio. Yeah. Not that I wasn't excited, but just, to get back into the groove of things.
Yeah. I was a little bummed that we waited another week. I think it's, in some part, I felt kind of the burnout of a weekly show with my schedule, and then having this month and a half off. I was ready. I was like, man, I just want to get back. Especially, I want to get the one show I'm planning right now.
Yeah.
Actually get something of like a good show. So yeah, I'm excited to be back on.
Yeah. And so that's what we want to do tonight, is just kind of a simple show. Welcome back. Hope to hear from you. If you'd like to leave a comment in the chat, please do so. And maybe we'll be able to interact with you, since today's more of a little laid back kind of program. We don't have a topic where we want to stay on point and make sure we get through it. Even though when it comes to the Proverbs series that we've done in the past, we want to stay on point, and then it's like, yeah, we're not making an hour here, but we're trying, So speaking of Proverbs series, we still are in Proverbs. We still have that to complete, to wrap up. We will wrap it up this year. I believe so. It should, because when we do get back to the Proverbs series, we're getting into chapter 22. So that being said, we should be able to make it through the year, excuse me, and finish off Proverbs. But who knows? Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll get down to the last chapter and it'll be 2024. Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe we'll get a show of impassibility in before that time.
Maybe. See, there's a running joke here. Mike's been wanting to do a show on the impassibility of God for, I don't know how many years now.
It's been several years now.
It's been several. And so we have some programs, like I said, planned. But if you have an idea, right down there where it says G220 Radio at gmail.com, right there, G220 Radio at gmail.com. Again, send us an email and let us know what you would like to see us cover. If you have a topic, maybe someone you'd like to see us interview, maybe we could reach out to that individual and see if we can get that person to come on. Whatever it may be, please reach out to us and let us know what topics you may like to see here on G220 Radio. I'm excited. We've got, like I said, some programs planned for this first quarter. We're pretty much filled in the shows for the first quarter of this year, which is only 2 months now, because we were off for all of January except for tonight. And so we are going to begin a series on the family. Now, this is something we started out when we talked about this originally, Mike. We talked about doing something on parenting. We was going to do something with parenting. But then as I started to look at this a little bit more, I thought, let's make this a little bit of a longer series. Let's deal with the family, and we'll deal with, what is the theology of marriage? And that'll be the first one that we tackle. That'll be next week. And so the theology of marriage, then we're going to look at the biblical duties of husbands and wives. And we're going to look at the problem of sin when it comes within the family, and then working together with a husband and wife. We have to account for that because we're all sinners. And then you're taking a sinful man and a sinful woman, even though you may be saved by God, saved by his grace, and no longer enslaved to sin. We still have the flesh that remains. And so we still have to deal with the problem of sin. And then we're going to talk about something that I actually was looking in my notes. It's interesting because this is going to be in our series, but I was looking in my notes today. I take notes sometimes on my phone of possible show ideas, and this one was in there. And I'm like, oh, I thought about this before and thought about doing this, but divorce and remarriage. I think this is something that I've wanted to do, obviously, since it was in my notes from a while ago, in dealing with a show like that, because I've been in independent fundamentalist Baptist churches where if you were a divorced person, you could never become a pastor or elder. You could never be a deacon. Matter of fact, in one of the independent fundamentalist Baptist churches that I was a part of, they had mentioned that, somebody had mentioned that they were told they weren't even allowed to sing in the choir because they had been divorced before. And so those things are out there. You have, even within the Reformed camps, when I became more Reformed, it was a little more open to an understanding of being the husband of one wife, not meaning you've only been married one time, but you're faithful to the one that you're with. And that if, depending upon whether your divorce was before you was a Christian, or the circumstances of the divorce, that could allow for one to then be a pastor or be a deacon or to serve in certain areas. And so those kind of topics came up, but then you still even have those within Reformed views, like a Vodi Bakum, who takes a permanence view. And so they're still there. Those views are there. And I thought this would be a good topic to discuss because let's look at it from a biblical perspective and try to be as biblical as possible. Because again, it always seemed like that was this unpardonable sin that you could be saved, but then you could never serve because of that was like the worst thing you could do. You could be a murderer and get saved and come and pastor a church or lead people. But if you were divorced, you're out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's a touchy subject.
Yeah.
And there's always, like, even like with those subjects, there's always, like you said, circumstances. What's going on? Mm-hmm. Is divorce even, how far do you go with, is divorce biblical or not? There's some that would say it's not, that it's sin. And then, then you have the other question, what if they remarried? You have a John Piper says, well, if they get remarried, they're living in sin. But then that brings up other questions. But what if, like, both get remarried and they both get divorced? And if they get married, like, are they still living in sin? Are they not? Like, how do, like, you just can kind of get fishy. But those are always kind of just sensitive topics.
Yeah.
That, we can agree to disagree. I do think there's some liberty in our theology and how we play that, but it is still very
it's a tough
high
one.
Emotional. It's an emotional topic,
right.
And that's especially in a world we live in now where divorce is so prevalent for non-biblical reasons. There is, to think through these things carefully require, probably more than just one show, but that's what we're going to give it.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is you mentioned, that it is very sensitive. I was in a thread where I seen some people who were completely against divorce and remarriage and said if you remarry, then you should get divorced because you're living in sin. And I said in the comments, what if you have children from that now marriage? What do you think that does then to that family? You may be a healthy family. So those are questions that arise, and those are questions we want to look at when we talk about this topic in another month or so. I think that's scheduled in March. We're going to hit that divorce and remarriage. But these are questions that arise, and what do you do? You even have those like I've seen with MacArthur say that yes, you can be forgiven, and if you're remarried, they're not saying go divorce, but then you could never be a pastor, you could never be an elder. There's wisdom in that, but then there's also what were the circumstances. If this person was divorced before they were a Christian, does that play a factor? Or if they were a Christian and their spouse was not a Christian and their spouse abandoned them or committed adultery, does that play a factor? How do we then look to try to counsel these things and then try to be as biblical as we are without just deliberately saying, I'm just going to do what I want to do because this is what makes me happy. But there are questions that come up, and we're going to seek to try to answer some of those the best we can. And like Mike said, hey, you may disagree with us, or we may even disagree with each other. I don't know. We haven't got to this yet. So it's going to be interesting to talk about those things, because I do think it's an important topic, and one that would be dealt with when you're talking about family, right? And then also from that, we're going to talk about children and, our roles as parents in how we are to teach our children and the responsibilities we have with them. And so, I have a house full of children. Mike's got a couple kids himself. And so, these are things that we don't always do well. And so we want to look at the scriptures and try to, be the most biblical as we can, knowing that at times we do fail, but let's look at what the scriptures say about these areas. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the family series. And I'm really looking forward to that family series, hoping to be a blessing or help to others as they may look at these programs that we put on through this series. And I'm really excited about it. I really am. Man, really, really looking forward to digging into it. Mike?
Yeah, I think it'll be a good one. It's always good to rethink about these things. I may have classes on them, and, you hear them quite often in the church. But it's always good to think about it, especially, and I still remember this from my class on family. I think it was family leadership, family ministry and leadership, something like that. And my professor said, the Bible doesn't talk a lot about marriage, but the Bible talks a lot about marriage. And that sounds contradictory, and that was kind of the point, the shock and awe. But what he was saying and what he meant when he explained it was, the Bible doesn't have a lot of text about marriage, but marriage is a relationship, and the Bible speaks a lot about relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's always kind of been stuck in my mind, that even when we think about our relationships, we tend to think about like our acquaintances and friends, but maybe not even closer with children and spouses. There's kind of that more internal, maybe external thinking. And so it's always good to be reminded of these things, that our spouses should be our close friends, so our closest friends. And that then obviously there are special instructions about that, but that is also included with the other instructions of just how we interact with the rest of God's image bearers. And the same thing with kids. There are special instructions as a parent to a kid, but how I act with them should also reflect how I would act with other image bearers, other people, Christian and non-Christians. And so again, it's always good to be reminded of these things. Peter talks about how reminding us of these things are good. We forget. We don't remember. And even if we do remember, we don't always do. And it's always good to encourage one another to pursue the holiness and the callings that God has given to us as Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do believe personally that when I begin to go through this series myself, that I'm sure I'm going to be convicted of some of my
Mm-hmm.
own behavior because I do have older teenagers, and sometimes they can get, and I'm saying this in a loving way, get under my skin with a teenage attitude and things, and sometimes I don't respond the way I should, and my wife makes sure I know that, not in a mean way, but she lets me know like it's not really a Christ-like way to respond to that, you know. And so I know as we dig into this family series that even myself, I'm going to be challenged by what the scriptures say and how I should model Christ before my unbelieving children, even when they are pushing those buttons. My response to them should not, it shouldn't be caused by those buttons being pushed. I should still respond in a Christ-like manner. And so sometimes we do fail in that. I acknowledge that. I'm aware of that. But that should not be the pattern in a person's life. And so those things can be challenging to us. And I hope they will be to myself and to the rest of those who tune into that program when we do the family series. We
So,
mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
so you're saying you're passable?
I'm passable. Yeah, I'm not God. So, then from there, we do have the Proverbs series, as we've already mentioned. We want to try to
Mm-hmm.
continue to work towards finishing that series out. It's been a lot of fun. We've had some guests on for the programs. Maybe we'll try to bring on some guests when we do the Proverbs series again, or it may just be Mike and myself, depending on whether we can get someone for that day and that time. But we use that. I think what we tried to talk about and use in the past was a way to bring on a brother, a friend of ours, somebody who we know, a mutual acquaintance or an acquaintance, someone we know through social media, which is where, honestly, I've met and utilized a lot. Well, I shouldn't say utilize. I don't think that's the right word. I've met and been able to have a lot of people that I've connected with on social media be on G220 Radio, and so we like to try to do that to have a brother come on to kind of sit down and go through it verse by verse and talk about it. And I think that's been a very good series that we've done, even when it's just been you and myself alone. But it's always fun when we're able to bring on another person to kind of help in that discussion, maybe bring something up we weren't thinking about, or maybe we bring something up they weren't thinking about. And it just has been, I think, a beautiful series. And I think it's been beneficial. And I hope it's been beneficial to those who are watching it as well.
Yeah, it's always good, especially on like we're a lot of people are told to read a proverb. You know, we've mentioned it, read a proverb a day. There's wisdom there, but to sit and to think through these truths a little bit deeper, take a little bit more time. It's always, I mean, it's God's word, and so He's shaping it. He's using it to shape us and to bring us wise in His world. And so yeah, no, I'm always a good time, and it's it's kind of fun to kind of like read through and find the connections, to not just read them as individual proverbs, but to see them kind of fit and flow together. And it's almost like a puzzle. And even the commentators don't always agree, which is always then fun. Like, which one do I agree with?
Yeah.
You know, what are they saying? I like I pin them against each other. It's kind of a little fun. But in one sense, and I say this, that's how I study for it. I read the text, I try to do it myself as much as I can and to think about it, and then I go to the commentaries. And then I look at it, it's like, okay, what are they saying? Oh, I see this. I'm not really seeing that. Where are you getting this? Oh, you don't explain it. Well, that's unfortunate. Or something like that, or go to a different one. I was like, oh, that's a really good metaphor. I really like that idea. And now you have kind of commentators become a conversation that you can listen to and glean, and then test, because that's what we're told to do. We're told to test them, and again, yeah, just that fun, and then in one sense, demonstrating hopefully how to read these proverbs, which will be beneficial in just everyone else's own study as they look through this. I think about these things probably a little bit way too much. Like even in Sunday school, I think about how not only do I want to teach about the passage, I want to teach it correctly, but I want to demonstrate how to do it correctly. And I've really tried to, in teaching, when I have opportunities teaching, whether it's podcast or Sunday school, really use these opportunities, because I think, and maybe we could just do an entire show on this, that with the decline of expository and doctrinal preaching, there's a relationship with that in the decline of the knowledge of the Bible. I think there's other issues with it, but if our pulpits teach topically with bad exegesis, we're going to read the Bible topically with bad exegesis. And so obviously a good expository preacher will help you to read the Bible better. And I think a Proverbs allows us to be ones to help add our voice to those conversation.
Yeah, I think it's vitally important. I don't think that when we say expository preacher, that if you go to a church that is preaching topically, that they necessarily means they don't exposit the scripture, because you can preach a topic and take that text that you're pulling from and exposit it, right? So long as you're not then taking it away from the rest of that context and trying to make it say something completely opposite. But you could still do expository preaching based upon a topic. But what we generally see with topical style preaching today is more so in line with the churches that are more seeker sensitive, and they will take a passage and then never really deal with what the text is saying. They just go off and they're making up a message that's like, what are you talking about? How does that even go with the text that you're speaking of? That being said, this happened to me on last week. I went to a revival. Okay. I went to a revival. There's a local church that was putting on a revival, and I've only been to one other revival in my life, and that was when I was not a Christian and I was stationed at Fort Lewis. When I first got into the military, I went to Fort Lewis as my first duty station. I was in the in-processing housing unit before I would go to my unit. I was doing all the in-processing thing. That day was over. I came outside and there was a guy standing out there. I come to find out later this guy was waiting for new people. And he said, "Hey, would you like to go to a revival today?" And I grew up in church, even though I wasn't a Christian. And I said, "Sure, I don't know anybody. This guy wants to take me to a revival. I'll go." You think back on these things and you think, I didn't know this person. That was probably stupid, But because he took me, I didn't have a car or nothing. Could have been a psycho killer or something. But I went, and I went 2 days. And I was like, this is a little strange. It was more Pentecostal for me. I grew up in a Baptist kind of church. And so I was a little, off. And then when I got to my unit, people were saying, stay away from them. They're a cult over there. And there was some strange things going on. But that was the only revival I'd ever been to in my life. But there's all these churches that put on these revivals. So I thought, I'm going to go. I told my wife I'm going to this revival because she had taken the kids to a Awana program that night. I said, I'm going to go over to this church for this revival. And she's like, this is what she said. She said, you would think you're going to get arrested for street preaching, but you're probably going to get arrested at this church at their revival. And I said, no, I'm not going in there to cause any issues. I wasn't going there to cause issues. I had listened to a series that they did on Calvinism. And it was a lot of misrepresentation and a lot of things that was just wrong from what we believe as Calvinists. However, like I told my wife, they did not deny original sin, and they did not believe in open theism. So even though they were King James only, staunchly, even though they there's areas where I would disagree with them. I can't say they're not preaching the gospel and they're not brothers. I can't outright say that. Now there may be something that you find out later, but from listening to that, it did not come across that. So I wasn't going there for that. I wanted to go see the revival, and there was, if I'm being honest, a preacher who was there from out of town, Andrew Sluter, who is a heretic, who does deny original sin. And so I wanted to go and listen to this guy. I didn't talk to him. I wasn't there to cause trouble or anything. I just went and sat down. I walked in. I never met the pastor of that church in my life. And he comes back to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm Pastor so-and-so." And I said, "Hi, I'm Ricky." And he said, "Ricky Gantz?" He knew who I was. I was like, "Oh man."
Is that good or bad?
Is it good or bad? But I sat down and I listened, and this Andrew Sluter opened up the text. He went to a passage and dealt with the mystery, and said there's 7 mysteries in the Bible. Most Baptist preachers don't know about these mysteries. They're different mysteries, and don't know what they are. And then he went on and he started with that, but nothing he said dealt with the passage that he read. He just starts with it's a mystery. And then I told my wife, I said there was a lot of hooting and hollering and getting loud, and people were getting emotional, but it had nothing to do with the text. So again, as we were talking about this expository preaching, and he literally said, "I preach expository in my church verse by verse." And I'm thinking, you're not even dealing with the text that you brought out, right? And so I'm just like, it is vitally important for an individual who is preaching God's word or teaching God's word to do your best. There's going to be times where maybe we're incorrect, or maybe we're reading something wrongly, and then later we learn and like, "Oh man, I was getting that wrong," and then you correct it. But you don't just use a text and catch a few phrases in there and then try to make that a message, but it has nothing to do with the context of the passage that you're reading. And so that's just a little story. That was an exciting time. But I will tell you, I told my wife, and I even told the pastor afterwards, because I didn't get into it with anybody. I didn't say anything about, my run-in with Sluter before, but the singing was beautiful, man. Like they were singing the whole, like all the people that was there singing out of their hymn book, and they were singing, and I'm like, it was beautiful listening to the singing. And then even they had a family there, the guy who preached second, which is another thing that I want to talk about in a minute, but he had his family there and they sang, and it was beautiful together. Like they were really it just like flooded that entire sanctuary, right? And so I was just like, man, it was beautiful singing. And that I did take away, and was like, I was blessed by the singing, even though the message was not good. The second preacher, his message was more in line with the scripture that he was preaching, right? There were some things that he said that I didn't agree with, which I'll get to in a minute. But other than that, I thought, well, at least he stayed in the text.
Yeah. And I just, obviously I probably mention it more on the show than I care to admit to, but I just think the more I've learned about preaching, the more I think about it, the more I read on the catechism and what they do and try to understand that better, the Baptist catechism, it just makes sense of what, like, there's like this kind of dual purpose in how we're doing it. And I think maybe if it was more explicitly said, it would, I don't know if it would change much. But I try this as a listener, because if I'm thinking about these things, how is this preacher doing it? So he's going, because we just heard an excellent sermon this past Sunday night on the Pharisee and the tax collector. That famous, the Pharisee, "I'm not like this tax collector, not a thief, not a murderer, I tithe, I fast." He's exalting himself. And this preacher was magnificent in just going into the depths of the doctrine of justification as this Pharisee justifies himself before God. And then you have this tax collector who can't look towards the heavens, realizes he has sinned, and that he's the one who was justified from his sin. And just kind of, using that to show kind of in some of the topics we have talked about, and how do you go from Bible reading to theology and how these work together, and now seeing that done in practice in the church. It was just a really phenomenal sermon that was preached. We were going to try to make it, we didn't, so we watched it online, but it was still just just even impactful. And I'm one that we should be in the local church. We would rather have been there instead of watching it online. But it was still an amazing a sermon to think about and just even to process in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that was brought up by that second preacher, and like I said, I actually enjoyed his message better than the first one, because it was in the text. While there was some things he said that I disagree with, and the one thing he said, and this is a show that I would like to do I would like to do a show on this topic. And I know we've talked about it in the past, but I'd like to do a show where it is the focus of the program, but Lordship Salvation, because there's so many, and two shows from this. One, dealing with Lordship Salvation. The other, honest disagreement in when you don't agree with a position or something that is taught, representing it honestly, fairly, properly. This is something I've learned over the years, even listening to you, Mike, when you talk about, reading the other side of things or getting the other argument, because when again, it's not that we're going to know everything about a position that maybe isn't our position, but if we're going to interact with it, even if you don't know everything about somebody's position, if I come up to you and I tell you I'm a Calvinist and you tell me you're not a Calvinist, and then you start telling me things about what Calvinists believe, and I say, no, I don't believe that, but yet you keep throwing these things that I keep saying I don't believe at me, you're not really listening and being honest with the disagreement. And so I think from that, the Lordship Salvation being a show that I would like to do at some point in the year, second quarter, third quarter, whenever, sometime within the year, because the thing he said when he got up there is he said, I'm against this Lordship Salvation. He said, now you might hear that and think that I'm saying Jesus isn't Lord. He said, that's not what I'm saying. He's Lord over everything. And he was saying these things, and I'm like, amen, he is. He's Lord over that. He's Lord over the heavens and earth. He's Lord over all things. But then the way that he represented Lordship Salvation, he said, this Lordship, people that teach this Lordship Salvation, that, if you sin, then Jesus is not Lord of your life. And I'm like, that's not Lordship Salvation. I don't know anybody who would espouse Lordship Salvation. It's not a term I use, being Reformed. It's not a term. I hear it. I know what people mean by it. It's not something I use, when I'm teaching or talking about it, unless I'm trying to explain what it is, and maybe some controversy. But it's this dealing with, from MacArthur, kind of, there's other people that are proponents of it, but MacArthur basically was writing the gospel according to Jesus as a response to this free grace kind of teaching that basically Charles Stanley and some others would say you could walk away from the faith completely. You could go be a Muslim or become an atheist. But if you said that prayer, if you asked Jesus into your heart, you're saved. And so this was a response to that. And I think it just kind of, again, solidified for me, the importance of honest disagreement. Like if you're not, and that's the show topic I would like to do one on as well at some point, is honest disagreement. Like if you don't agree with someone, do your best. Either read those sources, James White, love him or hate him. Some people love him, some people hate him, right? So, but one of the things I will say that I've seen from James White over the years is he will read the sources on the person he's going to debate to understand their position, so that when he goes into debate, it's a better debate because now I'm arguing against what you actually are arguing for and
Yeah.
giving you my side, so that when we go to this debate, it's not like, because see, honestly, sometimes when we have our shows, which we've had a few in the past, I just did a conversation on G220 Ministries. You can find it, where I had a conversation with a guy who was a Calvinist. He commented on one of my YouTube videos and we talked. And I am not a debater. I like to have conversations. I don't know you, so I'm trying to get to know you. So I kind of leave it open. But when you're having those conversations, like James White with these debates, they want to know the other side's arguments so they can interact with those arguments. So then it's more beneficial to the individuals that are listening to that debate. And so I think there's probably place for both, because I do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I leave it open and just try to learn where somebody's coming from. But even in that, I want to listen to what they're saying and respond to what they're saying, not respond to what I think they believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a discipline that has to be grown. I'm still not perfect at it. I know I try to be. But yeah, just kind of and my professors at Southern very much push this in our position papers is, and I've heard it elsewhere, but this idea that could you write the other position and them agree with it? Maybe not on nuances, but they could say, yeah, that reflects my position fairly well. And that's hard because it requires you to study and to know and to think about these things. And so in one sense, kind of in those conversations where they start assuming you believe all these things, is that they don't know. But I think also kind of with it is, and why this is probably a really good show, is that when you do that, you care kind of like trying to win the position, but you don't really care about the person. You're not really listening to them.
Right.
And that in dialogues and debates, to show you care, you listen, and you listen well. And I know this is important in just in evangelism. When you're talking to people and trying to kind of get to know them a little bit, that you can speak truth into their lives in this short little time frame, whatever, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you have with them. And the ability to listen and to address is helpful, because there's that caring aspect with it. If you do it with gentleness and with self-control, and they get angry with you, they get angry with the truth and not because of you, and you can walk away and say, I've done my job. Let the Spirit do the work. And so there's just that benefit of trying to listen to the other side and get to know the other side, because that's showing care for the person, that you care about the person and not necessarily trying to win the argument. And that's, it's difficult to do. Yeah. And it takes times and studies, and that's, a whole show can be dedicated, and just kind of that practical aspect, not only the theological underpinnings, but just how does that work out practically in all of our lives, including, our spouses. So even that, plays into, even our family series that we'll be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. And it can be difficult. I know, I think evangelism, as you mentioned, has helped me to grow in that area. But then there are also those times where I've fallen very, very short, where I've failed because I've allowed Hebrew Israelites to get under my skin to the point where I want to win the argument with them rather than my care and concern for their. I'm ultimately care, and am concerned for their souls, but I've allowed myself in the past to get irritated to the point where I'm going to show them You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then you really stop, like you said, you stop listening to what they're saying, and you start then doing what I'm saying, we need to grow and not do, is rather than having an honest disagreement, you're just trying to tell what you think you're hearing, what you think you know about their position, and rather than let's deal with what you're actually saying. And I think another area of series that I would like to do is, I've done some in the past on G220 Radio, but it's another series at some point on eschatology, and go through these differences. Because one of the things, in speaking about that honest disagreement, I think to us, people would say, well, you're not representing dispensationalism properly, because that's not what we believe is dispensationalist. Well, classical dispensationalists would disagree with that. They are dispensationalists. Everybody else is progressing away from it. You know what I mean? To some degree, they're progressing closer to covenant theology, right? And so, but that is one of those charges. Well, you're not listening to what we believe. That's not what we believe. But no, if we read the Scofield Bible, reference Bible, that's what it says. And, I was taught the 7 dispensations, right? And so there are nuances where people have differences. But even in that, that's one of those things that, you want to be able to listen to that individual that you're talking to, excuse me. But that being said, I think that would be another series that I would love to do, one on eschatology, to the point of maybe doing a series where we talk about the different, whether you're preterist, idealist, historicist, and futurist aspect of it, then dealing with the different types of millennial views, and dealing with then covenant theology when it comes to eschatology, as opposed to dispensational theology when it comes to eschatology. And then even from that, maybe looking at some of the texts that make amillennialism strong, or make postmillennialism strong, or make the premillennial view strong, right? Dispensationalism is not strong, but
I mean, that's kind of disingenuous, because
I was joking. That was a joke. It was a joke. But looking at those texts, I thought it was funny. It was a good one. But looking at those texts that they have strong arguments, but then looking at the weaknesses of amillennialism, of postmillennialism, of premillennialism or dispensationalism. Because I think if we do something like that, I think it can be beneficial. Hey, here's the strong points from this view. Here's passages that seem very, very solid for this position. But here's the weaknesses for this position. Because then I think what we would be attempting to do is to be honest with that and say, hey, look, here's some struggles that this position have to answer for, and sometimes they don't have the answers for it, and so therefore, doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means there's some challenging aspects, of that position.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know how much help I am. Out of all my theology, eschatology has not been one I've really thought through more thoroughly. Obviously, I guess if we do shows on this, I would have to. I mean, I can tell you the difference in all of them. I can explain them all. But I even have my own view, or what I believe. I guess it's not really my own view. I'm within Orthodox Christianity on it, but it's just not one I've studied a lot. Admittedly so, but it just hasn't. I don't know, I just haven't desired, I guess, to be the one way to study it fully. When you get to some of these ideas of being a preterist, or historic premill, or dispensational premill, or amil, or postmill, and how all those work together. Especially, but I mean, as you're mentioning, what you hold in dispensational or covenant theology really determines more dispensational, less covenant theology, what you're going to hold on the end times. I mean, I've yet to meet a amillennial dispensationalist, or even a postmillennial dispensationalist. And I think there's very valid reasons for that. And just their hermeneutical method But yeah, that's always. I guess I said I don't desire it. I realize I need to study it more. It is an area lacking in my systematic understanding, as like a full way. I just find other things to study instead.
Yeah. No, I get that. I really didn't study out end times for a while. My grandma was always fascinated by the end time stuff. Of course, she was following the people on TBN at the time, and
Yeah.
Perry Stone and whoever had something, like order this new book on what's going to happen, and
23 reasons why Christ is going to come in 2023.
Yeah, something like that, right? And so that being said, I never really found an interest in it until I was sitting in the independent fundamentalist church that I was a part of, and the pastor started mentioning, and I knew about the Left Behind stuff. I had seen the movies with Kirk Cameron years and years ago, so I just assumed. I didn't really study it, but I just assumed that was the position of end time. But I didn't really, I can't say I had a solid position myself because I watched the movie. I saw that. But the pastor was saying, can you believe that sister church down the road, they're mid-tribbers? Like they might not even be saved. And I was like, huh? So they're our sister church and they might not be saved because they believe in a mid-tribulation. And so that got me looking at it. And from that point, I realized this dispensationalism stuff that they're talking about, I'm not that. And that I went in, I want to say naturally through the reading of the scripture and trying to study it out, was like, this is covenant theology. And then the millennial position went to amillennialism for so long. And now I would say I'm post-millennial, but I mean, it just... Yeah, no, but it's been a progression. I mean, I held to that amillennial position for a very, very long time, but I believe it's one of those two. It's millennial or post millennial are the most logical with Scripture, but again, they have their weak spots as well, and premillennialism has their arguments for their strong points, and so. But I think that it was good for me to then get in and study it out. But it was because of that reason I had then to look into it. But other than that, it wasn't an interest to me because I'm like, that's all they talk about on that Christian, television. It just didn't interest me at the time. But yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, and kind of related. I think one of the reasons why I really haven't studied it too much was because I was into that dispensational, premillennial, looking for the signs, reading the newspaper, watching the 10 nations of the EU coming together and the rise of the new Roman Empire and the coming to the age. And I think some of that is just my own kind of reaction against it. I know it's important. But then just part of it is there was that when I was young and dumb and thought end times was everything. And now I'm not young and dumb and maybe just still, I'm probably still dumb, but in some things, but kind of just that growing, the colloquial, just having that being more mature in my walk and what's important, what's not important, and to think about.
Yeah. All right, so we got about 5 minutes left in the program, Mike, and we've talked about some shows upcoming. We will do another Why Calvinism is Bad, Part 2. We had an individual on at the end of last year, and we had this program. We're going to have a Part 2 of that coming up on the 28th of February. But Mike, you've got a show that we're going to do, and it's the renewal of theology after the fall. It's a show you've been working on to put together. One of the topics that we want to cover here in the new year. Why don't you go ahead and spend this last minute time that we have talking about what that's going to be about?
Yeah, so this is kind of coming after kind of me thinking more deeply about what is theology. I've done a show. We've talked about how to move from exegesis to systematic theology years ago. I revisited it kind of recently for a Sunday school lesson, and just kind of thought more, and kind of rereading some of the sources, just try to think more clearly about what is theology and understanding it. And kind of next is understanding the context in which we do theology. So the name I've taken it from is from book 2 of John Owen's Biblical Theology, where he kind of discusses how did kind of theology change after the fall. Because you have Adam, he knows God. I think rightly so. Calvin says this. I think it's valid to understand that Adam could look around nature and know who God is. Now, he can't know God fully, but he can know God kind of in what Paul says the natural creation tells us about God. His power, his wisdom, his judgment, and I guess he wouldn't have judgment before the fall. But you kind of get the idea that the heavens declare the glory of God, that the creation speaks of God. But then along with it, because nature was never sufficient to completely know God, is now God talking with Adam face to face in special revelation. And that's how Adam gets to know not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So then the question is, what happens after the fall? Because that's the context we live in. And even more so, we just don't live in any context after the fall. We live in between the coming of the Messiah, in which he comes to save the world, and when he comes again to judge the world in these last days. And then just so to, I guess, think about how do we understand, how do we do theology within this context, and thinking about really how do we interact with the special revelation that we get from God, and kind of more of our sinfulness with it, and how does that affect us. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about that, but even like I was kind of working on a little bit of it today, where we kind of doing theology in a new norm, but also that we do theology humbly and in fellowship. And what does that mean? And kind of thinking through some of those issues, and then kind of mainly, and this is where Owen really is helpful, is what are the theological issues that we now must think through in this theology of in this new era, in this new age, in this fallen age. And just kind of really, again, diving down more about what is theology, understanding its importance, and then how do we do it? Because that is how we get to know God. And this kind of my own, I don't know, in one sense, starting at the beginning of my own systematic journey, starting with what is theology, really diving into think about it, and then possibly moving into, and then how does this then shape my understanding of the Bible, and how does that understand my shape of how do I know God as creator? How do I know God as savior in the Son? How do I know God as he presents himself, as the works present themselves from the Spirit, dealing with the church, dealing with salvation, and kind of thinking through, in one sense, the basic how do we know type ideas. And so it's a show I've been, Calvin has sparked some of this, and just the times I've read the first 4, 5, 6 chapters in Calvin's Institutes. I know, Ricky, I sent you a recommendation of the book, which is kind of what prompt this one, called Faithful Theology by Graham Cole. It's a short 200 book. this is not the book. It's the closest one I have to it. It's another one in the same series. This is The Attributes of God by Jill Bray. But you can see thick wise, it's not very thick. It's the short stories in systematic theology. Unfortunately, the book I want is just out of reach. But just thinking more, being more intentional and thinking about the importance of theology and of itself, and then kind of setting up that foundation to have a better systemized thought process of theology.
Yeah.
That was probably way more than what you were asking for.
No, that's good. That's good. It gives us something to look forward to, and when we're having that program. Again, as we plan these out, we hope that these programs that we put together are beneficial to you, are a blessing to you, and encouragement to you, because they are as well challenging to us, because we have to look at these topics that we are going to put forth, and in this year, hopefully, our goal and desire is to be more intentional about planning these things out, and really doing our best to give you some good quality, informative, biblical truth. And not that we haven't done that in the past, but wanting to really hone in on some of those things and get better at our own theological positions, to where we are then helping to teach those who do listen and tune in to the program. And so that's what we've got on the agenda coming up. Welcome back to G220 Radio, because we are back now and looking forward to being back. This was episode number 561. And we've got quite a few episodes to go this year. And so we hope you will join us every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email us right there at g220radio@gmail.com. Again, it's g220radio@gmail.com. And we would love to hear your feedback. Mike, last words before we close it out.
Yeah. I mean, we stream on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just leave a comment too. Give us show ideas. We're always looking, always thinking about. I usually have a lot of terrible ones, which is why I don't have a lot of shows that I actually plan. Ricky does a lot of them, but if you can help me out by putting show topics in the comments, that would be greatly appreciated on my end.
All right, God bless, and we will see you next week.